The sledge, 10,000 BCE. At around 10,000 BCE, humans that lived in or near the Arctic Circle invented a tool that can slide easily on snow, a tool to help them move their hunting goods. Today we call it the sledge. This wooden vehicle had many uses, like transported hunted animals, stores from quarries, trade goods, and more. With the domestication of dogs taking place between 18,000 and 10,000 BCE, Alaskan and Siberian huskies were used to drag sledges in order to transport humans, materials, and goods faster. The sledge was not only used by the inhabitants of the Arctic. It is speculated that far later in ancient Britain, the Druids used the sledge to transport big stones from the Marlborough Downs to a position 32 kilometers south. Today, we call it the Stonehenge. It is also said that ancient Egyptians used sledges to move stones from quarries in order to build the Great Pyramids. The reed boat, 8000 BCE. At around 8000 BCE, a new type of boats was on the rise to replace dugout canoes that gave little to no room for cargo. It was time for the reed boat. Reed boats are made by assembling stacks of reeds to form a hull. They became more widespread in regions where wood was limited, areas like Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Arabia. The earliest physical traces of these boats are the remnants of a 7,000-year-old reed boat found in nowadays Kuwait. These boats have been around for a long time in Egypt, used for moving along the Nile to carry wine, vegetables, crops, and other trade goods. The wheel, 3500 BCE. Perhaps the most important technological innovation in ancient times, the wheel was invented in Mesopotamia at around 3500 BCE, during the beginnings of the Bronze Age in the Middle East. These early wheels were all wooden discs with axle gaps. Some of them were constructed from horizontal slices of tree trunks. And of course, the innovation of the wheel introduced carts and wagons. Carts are single-axled, while the wagon has two axles. These carts and wagons were often propelled by oxen or donkeys, and then used to carry people, heavy construction materials, and other many uses. Wheels never stopped evolving though. They went from a tree trunk to spoked wheels, to wire-spoked wheels with tires, to the cast alloy rims with tires we know today. Camels, 3000 BCE. In the Arabian Peninsula, at around 3000 BCE, humans have domesticated dromedaries. 500 years later, in Central Asia, the domestication of the Bactrian camel occurred. These animals were special compared to oxen, donkeys, and horses. Camels can drink up to 200 liters and store up to 40 kilograms of food in their stomachs. It can hold them without food or water for weeks or months even, rendering journeys across the lifeless desert a simple task, something that horses cannot do. Camels can also bear up to 300 kilograms on their backs, making them suitable for transporting merchandise through the desert region of Central Asia, Arabia, and North Africa. The galley, 2500 BCE. In the Mediterranean, particularly in Egypt and Crete, at around 2500 BCE, a large wooden vessel was becoming more widespread. The galley is a ship mainly propelled by its long oars. Although most of these ships did have sails, it primarily relied on humans, whether they were warriors, workers, or galley slaves. Galleys were very nimble vessels relative to other vessels of that era. Used as warships and also for trade and commerce, These ships have continued to evolve over time with various Mediterranean civilizations. By the year 700 BCE, the Phoenicians created a new variant of the galley called the bireme, which was mainly a warship that often defended merchant galleys from pirates. During Roman times, the war galleys had become significantly distinguished from the merchant galleys. They had wider, narrower hulls and forward rams. For merchants, ships could carry up to 350 tons, becoming deeper and larger, and progressively relying on sailing rather than oars. The downside of merchant galleys was that these ships were very big and they required large crews, and so it was costly to construct and maintain them. Therefore, the only way to make a profit was to use it for the shipment of low bulk yet still valuable and costly goods, such as spices, finished cloth, and precious metals. Canals, 520 BCE. While canals have been around since the early Bronze Age, they were only used for irrigation and not for transport, not until 520 BCE, when Egypt was under the rule of the Persian king, Darius the Great. He commissioned the construction of the Canal of the Pharaohs, also known as the Ancient Suez Canal, linking the Red Sea to the Nile. The canal was built for the transport of armies, merchant ships, and to support the economy of the newly conquered Egypt. Centuries later, canals became more sophisticated and crucial for globalization and commerce. Roman roads, 300 BCE. The Romans were notable for many things. One of them was the network of roads they constructed all over the empire. The Romans built 80,000 kilometers of hard surfaced roads. These roads were very straight with solid foundations and cambered surfaces for water to flow on the side. They were built with the use of concrete made from volcanic ash and lime. Constructed in 300 BCE, the Appian Way was the very first Roman road. This road was as straight as possible. Romans called it Regina Viarum, translated into the Queen of Roads. Most Roman roads were constructed mainly for military use, allowing quicker and faster marching. But these roads also helped transport commodities, particularly building materials, such as the Colosseum's Tavertino, used for the main pillars, the ground floor, and the outer wall of the Colosseum. The Tavertine was transported on wagons from a quarry in Tivoli, a town about 20 kilometers away from Rome. In order to move stones quicker and more efficiently, a road was constructed from the quarry to the construction site of the Colosseum in 70 CE. The Junk, 200 BCE. The Junk is an ancient Chinese sailing ship which began during the Han Dynasty. They were called the Kunlun Bo, meaning ship of the Kunlun people of Chinese mythology. Junks were capable of carrying 250 tons, as they were efficient and robust ships, and were constructed of softwoods with numerous compartments accessible from separate hatches and ladders. Junks were also the first ships to have rudders that helped them to be easily steered. These ships were used by merchants to move cargo and freight through rivers, canals, and the sea. Junks are still found today in China and in many areas of Southeast Asia. The Knar, 1030. With the birth of the seaborne empire founded by the Norse Vikings, many of the Norse kingdoms were established to settle in the Faroes, Shetlands, Orkneys, Hebrides, Iceland, Greenland, and even Finland. In order to help the economy and improve trade, The Vikings needed a ship to handle long voyages and transport freight, so they came up with a great ship named the Knar. The Knar was a cargo ship that had a large hull and was deeper and narrower than the normal longships, and could hold up to 24 tons. It was mainly used to transport wool, timber, wheat, furs, but often used to provide provisions and weapons to warriors on distant expeditions. Homing pigeons, 1150. Carrier pigeons or homing pigeons are birds that are capable of finding their way home from long distances. Although the sport of flying messenger pigeons was something as long as 3,000 years ago, the first pigeon post office was not founded until 1150 in Baghdad. The pigeons carried a small piece of paper rolled in a tube that is attached to the pigeon. They were regularly used for administrative and military communication. The Carrack, 1200. The Carrack is a ship that was built as a hybrid between Mediterranean and Northern European style ships in the 13th century. These ships were equipped with 2, 3, or 4 masts, and a mixture of square and lateen sails. The square sail was used for speed, and the lateen one provided maneuverability. Large carracks that may have reached almost 45 meters were also deep and wide, allowing up to 2,000 tons to be transported, making them the main merchant ships of the Mediterranean. Smaller carracks made possible the great voyages of European explorers in the 15th and 16th centuries. It became the favorite ship of ocean-going adventurers. They were more stable in the open seas and could hold enough men and provisions to be exploring the New World. The pack horse, 1500. Although they have been used since the domestication of horses in 3500 BCE, the pack horse was used the most throughout the early modern period. Due to the lack of built roads, most roads were often dangerously steep, and people mostly walked or rode on horseback, while goods were moved almost entirely by pack horse. They were used to transport cargo on their backs, could carry up to 400 kilograms of goods, usually salt, limestone, coal, fleece, and fabric. The train, 1804. 21st of February 1804, a British inventor from Cornwall named Richard Trevithick was testing the world's first locomotive train. The train ran a 15-kilometer journey from the ironworks at Penydarren to the Merthyr Cardiff Canal in South Wales, reaching speeds of almost 8 kilometers an hour, while carrying a load of 10 tons of iron. Trevithick's locomotive employed the very important principle of turning the exhaust steam up the chimney, thereby producing a draft which drew the hot gases from the fire through the boiler. The invention of the steam train marked the beginning of an era, the era of power transportation. The steam train evolved with time to the electric train, first introduced in 1883 by Magnus Volk. After that, trains modernized into the freight trains we have today. The lorry, 1896. In July 1896, newspapers published on the first public outing of the three-wheel Benz patent motor car. Built by Carl Benz, a two-seater automobile with a four-stroke high-speed single-cylinder engine mounted horizontally at the rear. The engine output was 0.75 horsepower, or half a kilowatt. Some years later, following the invention of the first car, by 1896, German automotive pioneer Gottlieb Wilhelm Daimler invented the first lorry ever. It featured a 4-horsepower engine with 2 forward speeds and 1 reverse speed. It was able to carry up to 1.5 tons. A few decades later, lorries began to be primarily designed for the transport of various items, and a lot of new types of them were invented afterwards, from refrigerated ones to ones built to carry livestock and more. The cargo plane, 1910. 7th of November 1910 marked the day of the very first cargo air shipment on a cargo-only aircraft. It was the Wright Model B, made by the Wright brothers. The US department store used it to fly 90 kilograms of silk 100 kilometers from Dayton to Columbus, Ohio. 1 year later, airmail emerged from the United Kingdom, and a month-long airmail service ran for King George V as part of the coronation celebration, moving mail by air 30 kilometers from London to Windsor. Airplanes continued to develop, and the air freight industry began to expand more and more, particularly in World War II. Cargo aircrafts can hold extreme weights in modern time, compared to that 90 kilograms of silk in 1910. Nowadays, the biggest freight plane is the Soviet Antonov, made in 1988, which can hold up to 250 tons at a speed of 850 kilometers per hour. The container ship, 1956. In 1951, the first purpose-built container vessel began operating in Denmark and between Seattle and Alaska. It wasn't until 5 years later when the first successful container ship hit the seas. It was a converted World War II oil tanker called the SS Ideal X. Built by the Marine Ship Corporation during World War II, later on purchased by Malcolm McLean's Pan Atlantic Steamship Company. On the 26th of April 1956, the Ideal X departed from the port of Newark in New Jersey to Port Houston in Texas, with 58 containers aboard. Since then, the freight shipping industry has progressed a lot. A container ship can now hold an average of 25,000 tons. And by 2020, the largest container ship in the world is the 400 meters long HMM Algeciras, which can carry up to 23,964 containers, which is a whopping 228,000 tons at maximum load. Cargo spacecraft, 1957. In the early days of the space war, the Soviet Union deployed the first artificial satellite ever. Sputnik 1 was launched into low Earth orbit on the 7th of October 1957, marking the beginning of cargo spacecraft. The Sputnik rocket was an uncrewed orbital carrier rocket developed by Sergei Korolev. Nowadays, there are spacecrafts all over space, and about 6,000 satellites orbiting our Earth. The space industry is evolving constantly, and as long as humans are ambitious to settle in other planets like Mars, I think we're going to see a lot of types of spacecrafts in the future.